And we're back in Inside the Ropes, and tonight we have a very special guest with us. This is a guy that I grew up watching and be mesmerised by the character that he had for the short period of time that he was in the WWF, but he was also in WCW, All Japan Pro Wrestling, and the AWA in its sort of dying days. He is the one and only, the Patriot, Del Wilkes. Del, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
So Del, yeah, I guess one of the things that I found quite intriguing about your career when I was looking into it was you were part of the AWA towards the sort of latter stages of the company, and your gimmick there was the Trooper. And I just wondered, how did you become involved with wrestling and get to the AWA? What was that journey for you?
Well, after I had a very brief NFL career, just a couple of years in camp with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Atlanta Falcons, I knew that whenever football ended that I wanted to pursue a career in pro wrestling. And I'm from Columbia, South Carolina, and there was a school here in Columbia that was operated by the fabulous Moolah, Lillian Ellison, one of the most famous lady wrestlers of all time, maybe the most famous. And so I went through her school. And after a few months, she started letting me work in some of the shows that she would, and cards that she would have around the state of South Carolina, just small venues, high school gymnasiums, National Guard armories, things like that. And one night she had Wahoo McDaniel working main event. Wahoo was working for Vern Gagne at the time in the AWA, and he had just come down to South Carolina for a few days to visit family. Lillian booked him for a show, and I met him through that. And Wahoo took a liking to me. We hit it off. I don't know, there was just something there where we got along real well, had a very good relationship with each other, and Wahoo was always good about helping young upstart wrestlers, guys that he felt had potential. So he offered me a job working in the AWA. When I first got there, I was working as Del Wilkes. I didn't have a gimmick. I was just myself. One of the guys that helped train me at Lillian School worked shows around South Carolina. He would go up and do shows for Vince. TV shows is just an enhancement guy. He'd get out in the ring for a minute and a half, do a squash job. And he worked as the super enforcer. In real life, he was a cop. He just did wrestling on the side, and he sent me a tape and asked me if I would show it to Wahoo to see if they may have an interest in him. Well, I gave the tape to Wahoo, and he said, we have no interest in the guy himself. We don't think he's very good, but we like the gimmick. And we want to put it on you, and we're going to call you the Trooper. We're going to dress you up like a cop or a highway patrol. And so that's how that character started, and that's how I started working for the AWA.
And what led you to, because you clearly enjoyed your time there, the more physical style, but what led you then going to WCW in 1994? Because the WCW, when Eric Bischoff had taken over, it seemed like he had a sort of plan of bringing in loads of different sort of talent from who had been there before. They brought in Hogan and different stuff. So they brought you in. What made you decide to leave Japan and go to WCW full time?
Well, the one thing was I had young kids at the time, and I loved working in Japan, but the hard part was being gone for a month at a time. And when you have little children, they change a lot in a month, and you can miss an awful lot. And I had started getting some injuries. I'd messed an elbow up, had to have surgery on it. So the desire to be closer to home. When you're working in Japan, I went through a situation one time where my wife was pregnant. I was over there. She was due to give birth any day. And fortunate, she didn't give birth till I got back home. When our daughter was born, she was about 2 weeks past due. Had she been born when she was supposed to be, and I wouldn't have been here for it. So just the idea that even if you're away from home, when you're working in the States, you're literally just a few hours plane ride from being home. You can get home very quick, very easily. You couldn't do that when you're working on the other side of the world. So I felt like it would be good for my body not to have to go through that physical style of work anymore. I thought it would be good for my family, for me to be closer to home, sleep in my own bed, a little more often and not be gone for 30 nights in a row. But I will tell you, and I knew Eric Bischoff. You see, Eric was did TV for us when I worked in the AWA. He was our color analyst, so I knew Bischoff from there. So I had a bit of a relationship with him. He called me up, offered me the job. I met with him. I took it. But looking back on it and really 6 months into it, I realized it was a mistake. I didn't like being there. I found it to be a very cliquish company. He was bringing in the guys from WWF. He was bringing in Hogan and Savage and Beefcake and the Nasty Boys. And I just found it to be a real cliquish kind of company. If you weren't in the Hogan clique, if you weren't in the Flair clique, because Flair was one of the bookers. They were doing booking by committee then. There was, I don't know, 6, 7 guys on the booking committee. Greg Gagne was one of them. That was another reason I thought I would enjoy it there, because I liked Greg. And but you know, I enjoyed my time working with Bagwell. He and I got along great. Spent a lot of time on the road together. But it didn't take long for me to realize I had made a mistake and that I wanted to get back to Japan. And I think I worked about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years in WCW. And I had made my mind up that I was going back to Japan. I'd already talked with the guys in Baba's office, and they wanted me to come back. They had offered me a spot back. And so I called Bischoff and said, look, man, I'm just not happy. I want to go work somewhere else. I'm not going to work for the competition. I'm not going to work for Vince. Haven't even talked to Vince. I'm going to work on another side of the world. So it will have nothing to do with you. It won't interfere with you. It won't compete with you. And will you just let me out of that last year of my contract? And he wouldn't do it. So we had a pay-per-view scheduled. I think it was for Tupelo, Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken. And I may not be 100% correct on that. Mm-hmm. I don't think I even told Bagwell that I wasn't going to be there. I was on a plane heading to Tokyo, Japan, to go back to work for Baba. And, of course, I no-showed him that night at the pay-per-view, and Bischoff's calling my house and threatening my wife and threatening, sending threatening messages to her to give to me that if I'm in Japan, he'll sue my pants off and blah, 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 blah. He even sent a letter certified and mailed to me while I was over there and sent one to Baba and about all this legal mumbo-jumbo litigation he was going to run them through. But they didn't take it serious. I didn't take it serious, and I never looked back. I was done with Bischoff and that crowd at that point.
And then, Dale, you would end up in 1997 joining the WWF. How did that come about? Who did they contact you? Did you contact them? And what made you decide to go and work for them?
We had actually had dialogue with each other since probably 1992. I'm thinking I had sent some tapes. They brought me up for a couple of dark matches. I cut some promos. I thought everything went pretty well. Rick Martel got hurt back during that time. He was going to miss a couple of weeks. They called me up and asked me if I would fill in for him. So there was always sort of a dialogue between us. I talked to Pat Patterson a couple of times, and then when Bruce got there, what's his name? Bruce.
Bruce Pritchard.
Yeah, Bruce Pritchard did the Brother Love gimmick. He contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in talking with him. Once again, I had grown tired of being gone for 30 days at a time. I was really, my body was really starting to fall apart on me. I had blown my knee out. I had ripped my tricep working in Japan, blew my knee out in the ring, ripped my tricep, came home, had surgery, took a few months off, went back, and my tricep ripped again. So I was beginning to see that physically my days were numbered. There was no way I could continue to work in Japan that style with the injuries I was having, and I was needing several surgeries, and I just thought, man, here's probably my last opportunity to work for Vince and to get back home and not have to put my body through the grind that I've had to put it through over here. And so I signed a contract with him and went to work for him, but it didn't last an awful long time because I was just physically unable to go. I had a knee that needed major surgery. I had an elbow that needed major surgery. I was just limited as to what I could do in the ring. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I was hurt all the time, and when you're hurt like that, you can't train properly in the gym, so you start looking different. Your physique starts looking different. It's an endless cycle of pain pills and sleeping pills just to be able to perform your job. And I tell you, I was almost relieved when Vince called me one day, and my orthopedic surgeon had talked to Vince and said, look, I just don't think this guy can continue going. This guy physically he's worn his body out. And he said, I just don't think he can do what is required of this business that he's in. I just don't think he can do it anymore. And I knew that deep down as well, but I don't know. You hate to give up on what you've dreamed of doing, what you've enjoyed doing, what's been a part of your life for so long. But I talked to Vince one day, me, him, and Jim Ross on a conference call. And he said, Dell, I just got off the phone with your doctor, and he said, man, he just doesn't think you physically can do this anymore. And it was almost like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I said, Vince, I don't think I can either. And I said, I've got numerous injuries. And I'll be honest, it was injuries I hid from him that I wasn't forthcoming with them about the injuries that I had. I wanted the chance to work there, and I wanted to be able to prolong my career a little longer. And so he said, hey, man, have these surgeries, get healthy, get well. If you want to come back and work for us on a limited capacity, I mean, we're all open for that. The main thing is we want you to get well, get healed up, get your body taken care of. So he left the door open for that, but I never went back. I had such a long recovery process with one of my surgeries. It took over 2 years. So, by the time I got to that point, I had moved on. But I just couldn't physically go anymore.
And around that sort of period of time as well, there was one of the TV shows where you ended up pinning Bret because Shawn Michaels had interfered. And at that point, from what you hear, the Bret and Shawn were at the height of disliking each other, not getting on. Was there backstage tension to you guys backstage? Did you notice it? And if so, because a lot of people say that Shawn Michaels back in 1997 was very different from the Shawn Michaels of today. What were your experiences like with him at that point?
Well, I never had an issue with Shawn. I never had a problem with him. I wasn't close to Shawn, but, in the times that we were around each other, never no issues, no problems. But it was very obvious that there was tension between he and Bret. And, and Bret would, having worked with him so many times, in the short period of time that I worked there, I worked with Bret quite a few times. And so I've spent a good bit of time on the phone with him in conversation, talking about matches, upcoming matches at pay-per-views and stuff like that. So we talked several times on the phone, on the road. It was obvious he didn't like Shawn. Didn't like him at all. He didn't like what was happening to him in the company. Didn't like the direction they were taking. And he was pretty vocal about that. So it was very apparent that not only was there tension between Bret and Shawn, but there was issues there between Bret and the company, Bret and Vince, and Bret and WWE. He just wasn't happy. I don't want to say grumbled all the time, but if you would lend an ear, he wouldn't mind telling you about his displeasure with the way things were going. And I lent him my ear, quite a bit.
I'm going to ask you about that particular day at Bad Blood when. How did you guys find out about Brian Pillman dying, and what was the kind of atmosphere of going on with the show after that? What was that? Talk me through that kind of day.
Well, I had been sick the night before. I had got really, really sick, really dehydrated. I had collapsed at home. My wife had to have me rushed to the hospital. They said I was extremely. I'd had a bad flu. I'd been on the road for a couple of weeks and just got really, really run down. The schedule, the itinerary, with me being sick on top of it. So I wasn't in Minneapolis the night before. I flew to the town of the pay-per-view, and for some reason I want to think it was St. Louis. It may not have been. But, as the afternoon goes on, we're supposed to be there at 12 o'clock to eat and check in. Well, you hear people asking, y'all seen Pillman? Anybody heard from Pillman? Anybody seen Brian? Brian's not here yet. And I really didn't think a lot of it. But we literally were probably 30 minutes before going out for our match. And me and Vader and Bulldog and Bret are in a room, and we're trying to come up with a finish. And I don't know if you knew Vader or Leon, but he was an extremely nervous kind of guy. I mean, he would get almost sick before a match. I mean, at the point of throwing up, he'd get so nervous. And here we are literally trying to put a finish together 20, 30 minutes before we're supposed to be in the ring. And he's really anxious, Leon is, and, you can just tell he's nervous about this and uneasy about it. And there's a knock at the door. We're sitting in like a conference room, the four of us. And there's a knock at the door, and Owen Hart sticks his head in. He said, guys, I'm sorry to interrupt you. He said, but I just need to let you know something. He said, we just found out that they found Brian dead in his hotel room in Minneapolis. And it just took your breath away. It was like somebody just kicked you right in the gut. And it was like, oh, my God. And we all just sort of had that kind of response. And I don't know how salty I can get with my language, but...
No, as much as you want.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what Leon said. We're all, oh, my God. I mean, when did they find him? And Leon said, hey, guys, listen, you know what? I hate the guy's dead, but fuck it. We got to come up with a finish. I mean, I'll worry about that shit later. And I just thought, wow, man, come on, man. That's one of your friends. Who cares about a finish? This guy just died. I mean, give us at least a couple of minutes to sort of to gather this and get our thoughts around it. But, he was more concerned about getting that finish down. Jeez. But it was stunning. It was numbing. But I will tell you this, and I don't know what anybody else has told you. They probably would be in agreement with me. While it initially was hard to believe that Brian had died, in all honesty, it wasn't surprising because he was on a destructive path the last couple of months before he died. Now, we all were living most of us, a very, very unhealthy lifestyle with the prescription drugs and things like that. I mean, completely out of control. The overwhelming majority of us were. But Brian was on turbo, and it was obvious that if something didn't happen, an intervention, him being taken off the road, something, that there was going to be a bad, bad ending to Brian. And listen, man, I thought the world of Brian. I first knew Brian in 1983 when I played football for the University of South Carolina, and he played for the University of Miami in Ohio, and they came to Columbia. And I played against Brian in college, so I'd known Brian a long time and thought the world of him. But it was obvious that Brian Pillman, something bad was going to happen if something didn't happen to get him off the road, to get him into a program. And unfortunately, it was a bad ending. And for a lot of guys, it ended that way. But Brian was the first. Brian was the first of the guys in my generation that I worked with, that I knew well, that died from the lifestyle and died on the road in a hotel room, as so many did after that. But initially you just couldn't believe it. But as you step back from it later that night, I remember getting back to the hotel room that night and just sitting on the edge of my bed, still in disbelief. But then I started thinking, I said, honestly, I mean, you could see this coming. You really could. I mean, he was just on such a destructive path. And unfortunately, nobody was able to help him or get to him.
And you mentioned earlier that you had ended up getting out of wrestling after that point. And the other time that people kind of remember you coming around was during the whole Chris Benoit issue, where you had sort of been on TV and talking about the trials of prescription drugs and stuff like that. And I just wondered, is that a difficult thing for you to do, to go on TV and talk about that, given that, I guess if you put yourself out there and you become And don't talk in the most positive light about it, that there's all of a sudden some people are going to say, oh, he's just bitter because he's not there anymore. Is that quite difficult for you to sort of put that aside and say, no, I'm going to go on TV and say what I think?
No, not at all. I have a couple, well, I have sort of one regret that maybe I presented it in a particular way, but no, there's no regret about doing it at all. When you have seen the effects, and believe me, we all went into that business with our eyes wide open, knowing that we were going to get in a physically demanding business, a business that was demanding from a travel standpoint, that put strains on relationships. I mean, you go into it fully aware of all those things. But I know at that particular time it was a vicious cycle of prescription drugs and steroids and things of that nature. And when you've had so many of your buddies, so many of your brothers, so many of your coworkers die as a result of that lifestyle, no, you don't have a problem. And you know, when I saw how it ravaged my family, and no, not at all. There's no problem. I'm not blaming anyone but myself for the things I chose to do. But I felt like at this point, or at that point in my life, that, you know, I wanted people to know, what was going on and why these guys were dying, and at such a young age. Guys whose kids I knew and whose wives I knew, and I'd been in their homes, they'd been in my homes, and you'd spent so much time on the road with them. So no, I had no problem at all going on TV and saying, hey, look, man, you know, there's a lot of bad stuff going on here, and something needs to be done. I love this business. I love this industry. I love these guys that are dying at such a high rate, and please, let's do something to make this better. So no, I don't. Now, I do have a regret that maybe I felt like in couple of interviews maybe that I was throwing the blame at Vince, and that wasn't the case at all. It's not Vince's fault that Bill Wilkes or Brian Pillman or Rick Rude or Bulldog or anybody else got hooked on pills and prescription medication. None whatsoever. My only issue with Vince, and my main issue with Vince, is it was so glaringly obvious with Pillman. I mean, everybody saw it. I mean, it just was, you couldn't miss it. That I just felt like somebody should have stepped in and said, I'm sorry, dude, we'll pay you, but you're done. If you don't go to rehab, you're done. And you've got to get to rehab tonight. And I just felt like something should have been done there. And wasn't. So that was, I guess, my main beef with Vince. Vince didn't make anybody do anything. So, you know, I regret that I may have come off that way as saying, hey, you know, this is Vince's fault and this is Vince's problem, and but I don't regret saying what I said or going on TV and talking about it, because it's had such a negative impact on so many people.
Well, Dale, we'd like to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the show and taking a stroll through memory lane with us. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it.